So I will give it another 1 minute before we start. You'll notice that I've started recording. And I see the waiting room filling up. And as we only have an hour, maybe I'll start with some simple introductions. So thank you for everyone for joining and to this next installment of RGI's Best Practice webinars. Today, we're going to be speaking about green electricity corridors, a practice named Integrated Vegetation Management, which some of you may have heard of. Green electricity corridors and green corridors in particular, I'm sure are relatively established now in infrastructure management and ecology across the world. It's basically the idea of building a passage between larger areas to allow biodiversity to flourish, to allow opportunities for nature to be reconnected in an often very fragmented world. And green electricity corridors then are when the space is beneath power lines, the management is changed by grid operators working often with NGOs and local people to allow these then to flourish and to become havens for biodiversity, really. I won't speak too much about that. You'll hear it from our fantastic presenters soon. But just to introduce myself, I'm Liam. I work for the Renewables Grid Initiative, and I'll be moderating for the next hour. Here is the agenda. So I'm going to do some introductions and housekeeping until about 10 past. Then we'll pass over to Ecofirst, a consultancy based in Belgium, who specialise in biodiversity management, especially around linear infrastructure. And then we'll hear from two TSOs. First of all, Elia, the Belgian TSO, and then RTE, the French TSO, both of whom worked on this extremely important pilot study funded by the LIFE program, the EU's LIFE program, to run green corridors on both of the transmission areas in Belgium and France. And then at about 1/2 just after, we will open with Q&As where I'll moderate questions from you all. So looking forward to exchanging with you all on that. Quick bit of housekeeping. It would be great if you can turn off your audio when the presentations are on. Same about video as well, so that we only see the person who should be presenting at the start. As you think of questions throughout, please write these in the chat. And then during the Q&A at the end, you can raise your hand and I'll come to you. If I see a particularly fascinating question, I'll go straight to that one. And just so you're all aware as well, this meeting will be recorded so we can share it online afterwards. I'll share the link with you all. And please, once the presentations are finished at 1/2, please turn your cameras then back on and write the organization in your name so we know who we're exchanging with. And I think it's always nice to be able to see everyone so we can almost be as if we're in the same room discussing these topics. Very briefly, for those of you who don't know RGI, who are we? We are a NGO based in Berlin, and we operate within what we call an energy ecosystem of actors. So we have members, 23 members, 12 NGOs, 11 TSOs from across 10 European countries. And we work together on a range of topics, all to promote transparent, fair, inclusive, and environmentally friendly development of the transmission grid towards the achievement of the Paris Agreement decarbonization goals. Biodiversity and nature are one of the topics that we work quite closely on, and indeed we've worked with Ecofirst on a briefing paper which you can find on our website under publications. Likewise, we've developed some videos, one of which very much related to the topic at hand, so you can also find these on our website. And as well, we have a database of best practices where you can also find some fantastic work of the actors that you'll be speaking with today, but also other TSOs and NGOs across Europe. So a database can also be found on our website, of course. Okay, I'm going to shut up soon and pass you over to our very capable speakers. We start with Ecofirst, and we'll be presented to by Jean-François Goudot, and his colleague Pierrette Nissan will be joining us. They are, hello.
Hello.
Then we move on to Elia, who will be speaking to us, the environment expert, Johan Mortier. Hello, Johan.
Hello.
And finally, we'll be presented to by Amélie Lafragette from the French TSO RTE, and she will tell us about their involvement in the projects and their own as well. Hello, Amélie. Okay, so without further ado, I will stop sharing my screen and give Jean-Francois you the right to share your screen.
Okay, so let's do it. So I hope you have it. Sorry for the maybe the.
We do. We can see very well. Thank you. Okay, I'll turn my camera off and give the word to you. Thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you, Liam. I will, try to give you in few words this main picture of what we're talking about this these green electricity corridors. And actually, I wanted to introduce with this word green electricity corridors. What is green? It's not electricity, obviously, but it's really this network which is created by the power line grid. And especially when it's about the power line grid, which is interacting with forest. These few drawings, these schematic drawings on the right of the screen are depicting what we talk about. We talk about vegetation management when the line are crossing forest and where it's obviously needed to create a corridor of removed trees to ensure the security of electricity provisioning. So basically, we want to show how we can switch from the above picture to the below picture, which is, as you can agree with me, a bit looking better. Well, so I will use a lot today this letters VM, IVM, vegetation management, and integrated vegetation management issue. And we can see this, these questions on three main aspects as a starting point. We talk about the security of electricity provisioning. We all need electricity all the time. Now for this webinar in hospital to save life, we need it everywhere at any time. So that's why operators like LIFE-Elia-RTE are committed to provide a permanent and good quality provision of electricity. And for this, when we talk about forest, there should be an action of vegetation cutting to protect the electric line. So how it is done, how often, that is what we talk about. And what are the consequences of this on nature and on people? First, security. So as I said, operators, their work is to ensure that there won't be any blackout, that electricity will be provided regularly without break. So they described some standard of security to keep distance from the trees and the electric conductors. So this vegetation cutting action, how it's happening, the point is just that technically the trees should be destroyed, removed efficiently with mechanical or even sometimes chemical ways to reduce the frequency of intervention on site. And so each 4, 5 to 6 years, depending on the local conditions, an operation should be applied to remove the vegetation. That sounds a bit like a never-ending story, because of course, when you just clean the ground with the trees, you leave an open space with a lot of organic matter, which is a great situation for new trees and new vegetation to regrow. And the consequences of this is that on ecological point of view, that we permanently generate a situation of permanent unstable habitat. The first stage of forest pollination is permanently remaining there. On the society, on people, the owners, they might feel dispossessed of their of this part of their land. This is exactly the definition of this right of way that is a public need. And in the end, probably nobody wants too much to use this area because there is no use that can be found. Of course, it has some influence on the price of electricity because these actions have some price, and it can end up also with perception, which can be wrong perception from people, and that's emphasizing the whole social responsibility of system operators. So, and I hope that you can see something moving on my screen. It looks like that. It's an endless work where after removal of the vegetation, there is a regrow, and then after 5 years, cut again, and it's growing up, and then it's a real endless work. So how do we cope with it? What's the idea behind that? We try to invent, to use the ecological engineering techniques to switch from a regular vegetation management to an integrated vegetation management, which integrates best practices in these methods. The goal is to reduce the interventions, reduce the cost and the impact on the environment, increase the security because then we create more stable habitats. It also can increase the services provided by environment, the ecosystemic services, the social services, and in the end also landowners they can find again some better usage of their land. I like this this short this nutshell picture of the situation. Above the traditional vegetation management strategy needs a lot of human input, and there is very little space left for nature input. And switching to IVM, it's going to the lower picture where the ecological engineering provided in the beginning can provide a situation with much bigger natural input of the forest corridors and reduce dramatically the intensity of human inputs. Still, the system is operational and there is a huge ecological benefits out of it. I went through the literature, and it's pretty striking to see that actually the IVM, the Integrated Vegetation Management, is not a new idea. The first prediction I could find dates from 1966 from the United States Forest Administration. And in this book, it was described exactly what we talk about today, how we can cope with vegetation in a better way to improve the ecological value, the biodiversity value of the areas which has to be cut for electricity provision. And this idea is, you can find it in many type of different flavors, but it's still the same idea. You can find it in scientific publication, you can find in some publication of TSOs. The whole idea is to reshape this clear cutting of the corridor into a better structured transition from the forest to the open habitat, giving a V shape of this corridors. And this is what we did in Belgium and France through a LIFE project. And I wish this animation will start. Yes, it's starting. This short 30-second animation describes exactly what was about in the LIFE-Elia project that will be described later by Johan Mortier. It's exactly what I said, planning with ecological expertise, the vegetation management can result in much better integration of the forest in the forest ecosystem of the power line grid. So transforming these corridors into a highly diversified in structure, in genetic and species diversity is something that we did in Belgium and in France during a LIFE project that happened during 6.5 years, and you have some numbers here. It was a 3.2 million euro project co-financed by the European Commission, because it's this is how LIFE projects are working. And during this time, we worked on more than 500 hectares in Belgium and France. I will leave space for providing some details by Johan. I just come with the few results in some pictures. We are now after the end of the project. It finished 4 years ago. Elia also planned the afterlife strategy. They interested Ecofirst to ensure the continuity of the management that was set up in these different areas through conventions, commitments, triggering agro-environmental packages. That it's also an incentive for farmers to manage in the proper way these areas. And we also applied biological monitoring to measure how actually these actions had a positive effect in these different situations. You can find these reports if you are interested in on our website, Ecofirst website. In our publication, there are 2 reports which describe the last yearly reports, and we are planning to make a full comprehensive report next year. So to finish slowly about this, I will just show in picture what I was explaining with this drawing and animation in the beginning, but this is now with real situation. So that's an example in Belgium where a site was heavily subjected to regrow of trees, of birches and different trees on a very wide forest corridor, which is determined by 2 electric lines. So it's a 100-meter width corridor. It's on a public owner terrain from the municipality. And we changed into this. This is really the same place. In part of this the site, we installed grazing with highland cows. Another part of the site is harvested as a hay meadow on about 9 hectares altogether. And this is working very well. The results are amazing. Each year we can find new species which are colonizing and developing on this area. And to definitely finish my talk, I will just give a perspective that is now our actuality. After this project, RTE decided to propose to lead a new LIFE project that was drafted together with RGI and Ecofirst. This LIFE project was sent in last February, and it will target 4 countries in Europe. So that's really the challenge of upscaling the activity that we had in the LIFE-Elia project. So we have 4 TSO partners, and this project, if it's finally accepted, will start in September. So this is the next step of the story. So thank you. You have here some links, email addresses if you wish to keep in touch, and we'll be very happy to hear your questions in the question answer session today later. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Jean-François, for that great perspective. And I think you made a really good point of just showing the transformation that really takes place. It's marvelous. Before we move on to Elia's presentation, and of course the Q&A comes later, but are there any comprehension questions that someone wants to ask? Does someone not understand anything? Otherwise, we will move straight on with Johan Mortier. Okay. So then, Jean-François, I will stop your video and begin to share mine. You in just a second.
Oh, yeah, sorry. I'll stop the sharing.
Okay, so you should all be able to see my screen now, is that correct?
Yeah, I can see yours.
Fabulous.
Good morning to you all. My name is Johan Mortier. I work for Elia. I'm an environmental expert, and I followed up the late LIFE-Elia-RTE project and the actual projects that we are doing on this issue. Next slide, please. So most of the information you can see on this screen, you already saw that in the presentation of Jean-François. Just wanted to mention is that at the original idea, we were planning to make a project together with RTE for 5 years. It started in 2011, but by doing it, we had so many demands that we had to foresee more budget and more time to do the job. And so it ran until the end of 2017 with a total budget of around 3.2 million euros. And the basic ideas, you can see them on the left of my screen, were that we wanted to create a new management under these overhead lines crossing natural areas and forests by multi-partner approach, meaning that we wanted to integrate the people living nearby the overhead lines. We want, of course, to improve the biodiversity, and we wanted to improve also the security of supply and the safety for the people. The project, although it ended now nearly 4 years ago, you can still find all the information on the website www.LIFE-Elia.eu. So if you want to catch up with certain things, you can always find information on things. And we were very heavily supported by the European Union and the Walloon region, who participated for more than 50% in the project. Next slide, please. Yeah. Here, just to mention that in these corridors, the basic idea was creating better forest edges. So we wanted to go from a U to a V section. That was already explained by Jean-François, but we also wanted to find other ways of recreating nature and management of these overhead lines in the corridors by planting orchards, by recreating natural habitats, meadows without a fence, meadows with fences to have sheep, cows, or horses running on it. And we also had the mission of reducing invasive species, but I must say that we only had some rare cases where we had these invasive species in Belgium. And the last one, what was always seen as a quick win for this project, is the creation of small ponds, as you can see on the photo underneath, with which is very attractive for young people to see, because already after a few months, this is full of life, while the trees, of course, take many more years to grow high enough. Next slide. Now, I wanted to stop a little while on this one, because to create and to recreate these corridors, we had to take, in fact, for the European project, 7 steps. You can see them here on the screen. Now, first of all, we had to find out what vegetation was present and what was the potential in vegetation. We had to make agreements with local stakeholders. Just want to mention, Belgium is a small country. We have 5,600 kilometers of overhead lines between 70 and 380 kilovolts. And we are never the owner of the land under the line. So we have to agree with the ones who own or use the land. This is an important effort we have to do before we get the implementation, then that we could create the plantation. And we had to develop also with Ecofirst now the management plan to maintain what has been developed. So once that is done, it's up to the stakeholders and sometimes also Elia itself to take care of the management of the corridor. And the two last ones were things that are not really necessary for the aims of the vegetation management in itself under the overhead lines, but it also proved itself to be of a big importance because the recreation of these corridors showed that it really improved biodiversity, and these biological indicators gave us the possibility to prove that. And while proving it, we could do communication about that too. Next slide, please. Now, when we were approaching the end of the project in the years 2016, 2017, we were looking at the possibility to continue the project, because in the project, the LIFE project, we were asked to also make a cost-benefit analysis, and this cost-benefit analysis proved to be profitable for us in the long run. And what you can see here on the screen is the detailed in figures to prove that, because when you look on the left of the screen, you have different types of vegetation management, going from forest edges that were restored or forest edges that were planted, down to recreation of peat areas, for instance. Now you can also see that the cost of creating these things is very different. That's the orange column, cost of installing. It goes from 1,000 up to nearly 6,000 euros per hectare. This is a very big difference between. So it has to be well considered. And then you can also see for the next 15 years what we see as being the afterlife costs that could happen when the line persists for 15 or more years. And you can also see then that, for instance, that once you created a meadow, you do not have any costs anymore in the long run. On the other hand, if you create a meadow for grazing for sheep or animals like that, you have a recurring cost because, for instance, the fence has to be reinstalled after 15 years. That's what you can see in the year 2032. So, but including all that, we could still, in comparison to the actual cost, who was on the right on above 7,500 euros per hectare over a period of 15 years, you could see that it still was profitable in the mean cost of all these installations and maintenance. Next slide, please. So what we did is we tried to convince our management in Elia that it was useful to continue this project without support of the Walloon region and the European Union. And we made an estimation of the costs for a period of 5 years. And what you see here on the screen is that estimation of the cost. And we came around a budget of 2.5 million euros, meaning 500,000 euros every year, to continue to create around, in fact, it proved a little bit less up to now, 75 hectares of green under the corridors in forested areas. So being it considered feasible, we defended that in front of our management, and we got their agreement. I also want to mention what Jean-François said a few minutes ago. That is that the afterlife also has a certain cost, and you can see him. He was estimated around 90,000 euros a year to maintain what was created in the last 7 years for that. Next slide. Yeah. Now, in the end, what was the proposition and what was agreed? We would recreate 325 hectares under our overhead lines. We had we would react also positively, because we already received that several times, propositions to participate in other stretches that we did not do in the first project. We would extend our efforts to the north of Belgium. That's a more suburban, urban area. It was for 5 years. We would do it without subsidies. And the reasons why this project was accepted is because it created a positive image for Elia towards authorities, communities, acceptation on overhead lines, also for future project. It improved security of the overhead line because it replaced the growing of trees by growing of shrubs and other things that didn't go as high. And we had a more positive relation with our environment. What was also positive for the people on the job. They were more and more proud about what we did. And so we decided to do it, because after, in a meantime, a mean of around 10 years, we would be profitable. Next slide. Now, we started in 2018, and we are now in the 4th year of the second project. We call it Life-2. So that is not the project that Jean-François Godot mentioned. Now, what have we learned? Because we were confronted with different things. We had changes in the working procedures in Elia, because the maintenance of large stretches of overhead lines was given to a contractor. And in that case, we saw that there was an increasing demand of life projects under the line. So the ones who had to manage large stretches of forested areas under overhead lines saw the advantages of this life project. On the other hand, we developed more than we did before LiDAR technology, and that in a certain way reduces the need of life, because it reduces cutting of whole corridors. Now, we will still have to see in the years to come what we will learn and what will happen, because when we only cut the stretches that are really necessary, not the stretches, the branches that are necessary to be cut, we risk that we have to cut a lot in the coming years, more than we do now. We also learned that in these suburban and urban areas where we are crossing forests, small forests in most of the time, it is more time consuming to find an agreement with the shareholders and with everyone implied. Legislation in the northern part of my country, Flanders, is more time consuming than it was in the south, and it is in the south. We are confronted with more than we were in the past, demanding owners, because they also see that Elia is capable of doing things. So that is something that makes discussions sometimes somewhat more difficult. And certainly in the north, we are now confronted with, let's say, more owners, not only more demanding owners, but more owners, I mean with that where there were areas with only one owner for several stretches, this becomes more and more rare. We are now working on stretches where you have to find agreements with several owners between two towers, for instance. And we still use the same 7 phases as we did in the project. We are still convinced that that is the good way of working. And we are looking at other things, for instance, like the greening of parcels of towers in agricultural areas, creating by that green stepping stones between forested areas. And what we also do more and more is the creation of green screens, trees, hedges to improve the integration of our substations, but also the towers or the lines. And thank you for your attention. I think that was the last one.
Thank you very much, Johan, for that great presentation. Really a demonstration of such a success story. I think it's quite inspiring. I shall now move straight over to Amélie's presentation because I'm aware of time, and then we can move into the Q&A rounds. So let me just have a little fiddle again. I think I'd be an expert at this by now, but okay. So you should now be able to see my screen, is that correct?
Yes.
Wonderful. Then over to you, Amélie.
Thank you. I'm Amélie-Lafragette. I'm working on project on climate and biodiversity issues. And thank you to Liam to give me the opportunity to share with you the RTE feedback on the integrated vegetation management. Just few words about RTE. RTE is the French electricity grid of high and very high voltage. So it's the next slide, please. The network covers 400,000 hectares. 20% are located in forested area where RTE has the obligation to manage the vegetation in order to maintain the security. Vegetation can generate short-circuit buffers. In the next slide, as mentioned by Elia and Ecofirst, new vegetation management methods were tested several years ago in 2011 in Belgium and in France with the LIFE-Elia-RTE project. In France, it took place on 7 experimented sites representing around 50 hectares. The feedback on this LIFE project and other experimentation on integrated vegetation management decide RTE to define a project aiming to study at the industrial level the development of the new vegetation management. The project is named BELIEVE and was implemented into 3 different biogeographical regions, north, south, and west of France. This project aims to size at the regional scale the organizational and financial needs, quantify the benefits of integrated management with an objective of 200 hectares converted at the end of 2020 initially, but postponed to 2021 due to COVID crisis. In the next slide, you can show the different objectives per region. The ability to convert classical vegetation management to integrated one depends on several factors. In the southwest region, we were able to triple the initial objective because of the natural areas and habitats in this region, because it enables to use a method quite easily to be deployed. It's a selective cutting. The method are more heterogeneous in the other region. In the slide 5, the next slide, you can see that in this northeast region, where 100 hectares were converted, it's a beginning of green infrastructure, named Tramvert in France. This Tramvert involves benefits in terms of biodiversity at a larger scale. The benefits and costs of alternative vegetation management are still consolidated. With the first results of the BELIEF project in 2020, it was decided to write a new vegetation politic in order to industrialize the alternative vegetation management. In the next slide, you can see that, no, it's not this slide, it's the slide after. And after, please. Thank you. We have established a trajectory target in terms of new surface converted into alternative vegetation management. And in 2025, we plan to achieve 3,000 hectares with the integrated vegetation management. The more we acquire knowledge, the more we are able to propagate the new practice for vegetation management. In parallel of the deployment of the alternative vegetation management in France, we are working at the European scale to contribute to the green infrastructure in Europe. In the next slide, as said by Jean-François just before, is the reason why we submitted a new LIFE project named Grid for Life that aims to prepare the deployment of integrated vegetation management through 4 countries with 3 main activities. So the first one is the implementation of the integrated vegetation management in different geographical climate contexts. The second activity is the assessment of benefits at different levels, benefits in terms of cost, in terms of relationship with local stakeholders, and the benefits in terms of species connectivities to show the concept of green infrastructure. And the last activities is the communication, the sharing of best practice, and the valorization of these results at different levels, local and institutional. So I finish my presentation. Thank you a lot for your attention, and I would be pleased to answer your question.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Amélie, again, for that great perspective on the topic. So we are now reaching the discussion part of the webinar. I would like to invite you all to change your view to gallery and turn your videos on so we can see you. And you'll see Pierrette Nisa, hello, from Ecofirst. She'll also be answering questions with Jean-François. And I'm looking forward to the discussion. We already have some great questions that have come in. And maybe just to get us started, I see a question which really interests me as well from Daniel Budden. And it would be a question to the TSOs, but also anyone who feels moved to answer it. If one of you could give a perspective about how this has changed or how this reflects in a public engagement positive image. Are visitors welcome to these areas? Do people go there for leisure activities? And how far has this been understood with the effect that it has, on the public view of electricity infrastructure? I give the word to anyone from the team. Johan?
Yeah, I can answer to that because we really saw by doing the project in the period 2011-2017 that, as Jean-François already mentioned, these areas under the overhead lines were considered to be no man's land and were more or less abandoned and not really looked at. But by recreating these areas and developing, fences, green edges and things like that, we really attracted people to these corridors. And one of the aspects of the EU project was also that we had to create some viewing points to look at these things, and these are really visited by people wandering around in these forested areas. And me myself, I do that too. So I can really say that it attracts people, and people have another view of yes, these open areas that are no longer so open as they were before.
Thank you very much, Johan. Maybe just to build on that question, I know that you engage a lot of stakeholders throughout the projects. Again, this question is open to anyone from the team, but how are your experiences with stakeholders? I'm thinking farmers, but also beekeepers, hunters, things like that.
Or maybe I will give a few words on this. It's true that stressed with the time, we couldn't develop too much this this question in the slideshow, but the real key point of the LIFE-Elia was to build new commitments with local owners, hunters, farmers to manage the land. So yeah, there was a lot of different solutions that we explored and could set up for the management of the line and for the usage of the line. There is not too many examples of beekeepers. There are some, but what can we can say is that this rich flowered meadows that we developed is a real important impact on pollinators, on natural pollinators. And the hunting activity, which is quite important in southern Belgium, in Ardennes, also was the engine to find agreement with local usage of the land.
Thank you very much, Jean-Francois. Another question that's come in a couple of times, and I see that Kenny's here, regarding birds. Would you like to unmute and ask your question, Kenny?
Morning, thank you. Yeah, just we have some guidance here in Scotland about bird risk, strike, collision risk from overhead wires. I'm just wondering if that increases, and do you have to increase the monitoring, perhaps carcass searches underneath the wires, and put in any mitigation on account of improving the habitats around the wires and the lines? Thanks.
I can answer to that. So I'm Johan Bertier from Elia. I am also implicated in projects for marking of overhead lines to reduce the collision risk. Now, first thing I have to say, we, just like RTE, we are at very high tension levels, which means that we have high distances. We are not between conductors. This means that we do not, or only very rarely, have problems with electrocution. We more often have problems with collision, birds that hit the conductor or the earth wire. Now, we didn't specifically look at what you ask, but what I can answer to your question is that we had a study done in 2012 based on materials up to 2010 for the whole Belgian territory to study the collision risk depending on the two criteria, the number of birds living in the area and the rareness of the bird, to simplify. And we redid that study last year, and we did not see anything that has changed in the areas that we worked in for the LIFE projects. But it was not the subject of the study. The study was to see where is there a high risk of collision and where is the risk of collision low, and we concentrate our efforts of marking in, of course, the high risk areas. But because we had a map of the whole Belgian territory, so also a map of our complete overhead line network, I can say that there is no difference seen between 2010 and 2020 of these stretches of lines. But I find it a good idea to think of that and maybe look more into detail, because since we did these studies, we also know that certain species are probably more feasible for hitting a line than other ones. And for instance, it heavily depends on how high the line is in comparison to the height of the forest on both sides. Because if the line is lower than the forest, there is in fact no change. But for certain species, the fact that the line is a little bit above the forest, that makes a difference, we think. We don't have enough material yet, but we're following it up.
Thank you, Johan. Thank you, Kenny. If I can just maybe add to that as well, looking at future projects in expanding green corridor networks around Europe, there are also similar consortium Europe-wide projects planned around bird protection. And indeed, if the LIFE project goes ahead, it will have considerable symbiosis with other bird projects. We also sent off another proposal called Safeline for Birds. And yes, these all look together at how to make lines safe for birds. So this is a constant consideration, something also we look in quite heavily at RGI. And you can read more about that on our website too. Another question that came in from Anna is about the increased biodiversity in wooded areas. Anna, are you here, and would you like to answer that question? Ask that question? If not, I can go ahead. Yeah.
Yes, can you see me?
We can hear you.
Okay. Good morning. I'm from the Universitat Autònoma de Barcelona, and we are working with the Red Eléctrica Española. And my question is about if you follow up on changes in the fauna and flora, and which types of samplings do you carry out, or are you expecting to carry out in the next project? Thank you.
I can answer this question if you want. We are currently monitoring with a biological monitoring all the sites that were restored during the LIFE-Elia-RTE project in Belgium for now. So since 3 years already, we are making an afterlife monitoring. During the life, there was already initial state monitoring that were implemented. This was mainly the habitat description, thanks to botanical monitoring. So all the vascular plants were identified and quantified in order to describe the habitat. And we also have regarding the habitat in place, different taxonomic group we are targeting. We made bird inventories and also invertebrate like butterflies. In the ponds, we look for dragonflies, and we also look for reptiles. So for now, we are also evolving towards bat monitoring in the forest management, and we are also looking for a small mammal called hazeldoor mouse, which is a Muscardinus avellanarius, which is a quite typical species in the structure edges, for example. So it depends really on the habitat we have. On a hay meadow, we look more for butterflies and cricket and grasshoppers also, and also the plants. And then we also make a different kind of monitoring. This is what is done for now in Belgium, and we are also foreseeing to make an evaluation of the evolution of the habitat in the sites that were restored in France for the next 2 years. And we will probably next year make a quite big report on the global evolution 5 years after the end of the project, so that we can have a better evaluation and comparison of all the evolution of all the fauna and flora populations. I hope this answers your question.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you both. I see a good question come in about TSO competencies from Ines Silva from EHERDIS. I would pass over to you, Ines, if you'd like to ask your question.
Sorry. Hello. My question is about which competencies or skills do the service providers have in this kind of integration management vegetation, because I think it will be specific skills to do that kind of work. So I'm interested in, to know more about it. Thank you.
Maybe a question for one of our TSOs, Amélie or Johan?
Yes, I can begin, and Johan, you can complement me. So biodiversity and ecological design, it's not the core of skill on and activity. So we work on this with companies specialized on this activity, like Ecofirst. So we do this work with the external assistance.
Yeah, I can confirm that, because, for instance, we have patrollers who patrol the line, and while patrolling the line, the aim objective is looking at the tower and the conductors, if everything is in good condition, but they also look at the risk that a certain tree approaches the line. And so up to now, they do both things in patrolling. They look at the technical equipment, and they also look at the corridor. Is everything all right? But as Amélie said, we do not have really specialized people to do that kind of job. So these recreation, these management and the redevelopment of these corridors is always with external people, and it's more someone like me who is the one who has to make the connection between the experts in their matter, biodiversity, vegetation, potential of certain plants and species, and then it's up to me to explain that to the technical people and to convince them sometimes also to do things that are not especially logical for them, but are logical for the other side. So we have to find an agreement between the two, and that's the same for the issue of collisions of birds. You have questions from biologists and ornithologists, and then we have to look where and how we can place markers, for instance, because that's a technical issue.
Thank you.
Thank you both. We have one more minute. I would say if anyone in the crowd has a burning question, feel free to raise your hand and I will go to you. Yes, go ahead, Francisco.
Yeah, just to highlight an aspect that I commented on the chat. And first of all, thank you in particular, Amélie, Jean-François and Johan, that these principles of integrated vegetation management can also apply outside a forest context. For example, in agricultural land, and particularly for very high tension power lines crossing, for example, very intensive agricultural land. And I think Johan mentioned that using the bases of the pylons as areas that could be managed for biodiversity purposes is, in my opinion, part of this approach that can be used as well. That's it. Thanks.
Yeah. I can confirm that. We just 2 weeks ago got a question from a municipality that wanted to protect the lark because it's becoming rare in the northern part of Belgium, and they want to redevelop the foot of the tower in making it something like a small meadow of it. That's only 100 square meters, but it would help if we do that on, in that case, 25 towers crossing agricultural land.
Okay. And with that, I think we've reached the end of the webinar. The time is 11:01. I'd just like to say once again, thank you to everyone who joined. Thank you to our speakers. and also for this fantastic work. It's a really exciting project, and we hope to see more of it in the future. A few of you asked about presentations. These will be made available afterwards. Also, the webinar recording will be on our website. And like I said, you can find more publications, videos on our website too. So thank you for everyone for joining, and see you next time.
Thank you too. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Goodbye.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Thank you,
Bye,
Liam.
thank you. Ciao.
Bye-bye.
Have a nice day.